Hello, greetings. This is Jim Mckeeth, and welcome to Delphi today, tomorrow, and forever. Just in case you don't know who I am, I'm Embarcadero's Chief Developer Advocate and Engineer. I am a longtime software developer, got my start in BASIC, spent a lot of time in Turbo Pascal, and fell in love with Delphi, but then actually spent a lot of time in a number of other programming languages and learned to appreciate them. But Delphi's always been my favorite and the one I keep coming back to. My claim to fame is back in 2000, I filed a patent for the underlying technology of swipe to unlock, and I'd forgotten about it, to be honest. And I saw a news headline one day that said, Apple didn't invent swipe to unlock, Jim Mckeeth did. And I'm like, that's my name. This was during the Samsung Apple lawsuits. So it's kind of an interesting time. It is not something I get any money or Christmas cards or anything like that from, but it's still kind of a cool thing to put on my slides and to talk about, to take credit for, I suppose. I also built a thought-controlled drone with Google Glass and a number of other things. Basically, I'm a geek and I love everything about software development. This actually grew out of a conversation I had with someone who was new at Embarcadero and not really familiar with Delphi and wanted to know what was it that set Delphi apart. And so I kind of put this together and it became Delphi's DNA. And honestly, I could probably spend like an entire hour talking about this, but the reality is you're probably familiar with most of these things, so I'll discuss them fairly quickly. The biggest thing, I think, is the developer productivity. That's one of the things we love about using Delphi is where we just get things done quickly. But at the same time, you're building native apps that perform fast, that are fast for the end user. So it's kind of that 1-2 punch of being fast to develop and fast to run. The other thing that is kind of really key to Delphi's underlying concept, or is from the beginning, database access. And there are other tools that have database access, but Delphi just makes it really easy to do, which I think is great. The interoperability with other languages, especially C++ via C++ Builder and RAD Studio, is a huge thing. The Python interoperability, there's a number of other languages that interop with it as well. And platform API access. And so this kind of contrasts with the productivity. There's a lot of high productivity tools out there that you can build things quickly with, but they don't give you that low-level access, whereas Delphi gives you that low-level access too. The visual designers are part of that developer productivity, lets you prototype it, see what it's going to look like in the IDE, and build that GUI quickly. And also, it's part of your application. It's a production-ready application. I'm a huge fan of the community, obviously being here. Great to be here, part of this group. And backwards compatibility, I think, is also a really important point because you have an investment in your code if you have existing code. And I talk to so many other developers that use other languages, and they say it kind of jokingly, but usually if there's a new version of their language out, they're like, oh, well, I guess I need to go rewrite all my programs because the new version's out. And I'm sure it's not a completely throwing it all out, but so many other languages are just not committed to backwards compatibility. And there are pros and cons to that, to be sure, but that's something I really, really do appreciate about Delphi is it does respect that commitment, that investment we have in our projects. This touches on some of that again as well. I was trying to explain like what the differences in rapid productivity languages versus low-level languages and came up with this idea that there's essentially like 3 levels of development. The top level is components and designers. This is kind of your low code. It's where you're just getting things done really quick, kind of the drag and drop developer side of things. And that's shown up in like Delphi's property method events, the visual components and non-visual components. FireDAC makes it really easy to just build database applications without writing any code, etc. The next level down is common libraries. And this is, you see a lot in like Python, for example. Python's got a huge set of libraries, but no visual designers. Well, there are some visual designers, but not a lot. It doesn't have, that's not the main concept of Python. So this is where you can get a lot done because you don't have to write all that low-level code, but you're still writing a lot of code to do things. And then the lowest level down at the bottom is where you are reaching down and touching the metal. This gives you the maximum flexibility where you're accessing platform APIs, you're writing inline assembly code, you're manually managing memory, whatever the case may be. So a lot of times this lower level is what we think of for like C, C++, assembly are really common down at those lower levels. So the thing I love about Delphi is it gives you access to all three, and you can move between all three as easily as you want to. I like to say Delphi is the original low code development framework for people that actually like to code. And what I mean by that is in Delphi, you can operate at that low code level and just drop some components. But when you're like, oh, it'd be nice if this component did something different, or if I had a new component, you can write that in Delphi because Delphi is written in Delphi. And so you're never limited by what you can do in Delphi, but you still have that maximum flexibility to be incredibly productive. This was a report I saw a while back, and I actually kind of wanted to repeat it. They compared Pascal, not Delphi. So I'm curious to see how Delphi performs in this. But I thought it was really interesting in that they looked at efficiency as far as energy consumption, execution time, and memory usage of different programming languages. So they did 27 different programming languages and had a variety of different tasks, projects, or algorithms that were executed in each programming language, and then compared them. And the cool thing is we see Pascal, and they're probably using free Pascal to be honest, but honestly, I group them together a lot, probably more than I should. But we see Pascal at the top in memory, but then it also does really, really well in energy consumption and execution time. And I think that when you combine this with the fact that Delphi gives you that ability to operate at all three levels, and it is energy efficient and memory efficient and fast, that just is really an amazing combination. This I started this a while ago, and it keeps growing, and I keep having to shrink things down and push them in here. But this is a collection of all the different platforms that Delphi has targeted over the years. And actually, the only one that Delphi doesn't currently target anymore is that very first one, Windows 3.1 16-bit. Delphi 1 was 16-bit only. Delphi 2 included Delphi 1, so you could still target 16-bit, but 16-bit went away, and yeah. You can download Delphi 1 from our website. It's still available, as well as Turbo Pascal. We have it in some museum code collection someplace. Actually, I'm not sure where it is offhand, but there are still available if you want to do that. But the amazing thing, though, in my mind, is if you look at the rate of new compilers and platforms being added, and I have Windows UWT on here, which isn't technically a whole new platform, but it does involve a bridge to bridge between the universal Windows applications and Win32, Win64. So I include it as a separate platform, but you look at all these represent different compilers, different bridges, and effectively different platforms you can target with Delphi. And the beautiful thing is, like I said, if you exclude off the Win 3.1, all of these can be targeted from a single application. Cross-compile it to all those platforms. I am a huge fan of FireDAC. Carrie Jensen's written the definitive book on it, I would say, probably. So I could probably spend all day talking about this one as well, but I just want to make a shout out to FireDAC. I think it's great. It's very, very powerful, and it is the one data access framework that connects to all the data sources, which is beautiful. The thing I love about it, though, is it doesn't really limit what you can do with each of the platforms. It still feels like you're giving you as much access as you want to those different databases. And it's incredibly powerful. The local SQL, for example, amazing. The FD mem table, fantastic. Just all these great tools in there. I can't tell you how many times I've had just some data I need to maybe move between one database to another, or import or export from a database or whatever. And I've just gone into Delphi and dropped some FireDAC components and been able to do it actually at design time, not actually need to run my program, just because FireDAC is so powerful when you get into some of the things you can do with the adapters and all that great stuff. So huge fan of FireDAC. Occasionally I get someone that's like, I don't use FireDAC, I use insert third-party component framework here. And they feel like they're cheating on Delphi. No, you're not. That's fine. If you got another framework you love, awesome, more power to you. It doesn't make me sad. But if you're not familiar with FireDAC, if you haven't tried FireDAC in a while, I definitely recommend you take a look at it. It is a great, great framework. The REST client library is fairly recent. XE5, which I guess isn't that recent now, shortly before I started at Embarcadero. Wow, okay, so it's older than or shortly after I started at Embarcadero. But it is a fantastic framework for creating REST client libraries. I have a funny story, actually. I was traveling, and I don't remember where now, and they took me, is actually one of the sales guys ran into an old friend of his and wanted me to go talk to him about Delphi. He was running a C# shop, and they were building all desktop applications, web applications. And his CTO had come to him and said, hey, we need a mobile app. And he's like, well, we're a C# shop. I know C#, so I'm going to use Xamarin. And so he thought he would give himself a month to build a simple REST client in Xamarin to kind of gauge that out. And he was like 3 weeks in and kind of getting frustrated because he didn't feel like he was making as much progress as he wanted. And I smiled and I said, I bet you I can write a REST client application in Delphi in 5 minutes. And he's like, no way. And I'm like, I haven't done this before, but I bet you I can get really close to 5 minutes. And it may have taken me a little longer than 5 minutes, but it was really dang close just when I got into explaining what I was doing and stuff like that. And he actually had his phone out and was videotaping it and stuff just because he couldn't believe how amazing it was. And that's just something, I love about Delphi is you have that really high productivity thing. But then at the same time, like I said before, if you need to go beyond what you can do with the REST debugger and that copy components button in there that gets you that rapid productivity, you can. You can go in there, you have all the source code, and you can expand it and enhance it. I wanted to talk a little bit about VCL versus FireMonkey. Most likely you're familiar with both of these, but sometimes I get people asking me about them. The VCL is, of course, originally designed for Windows. It's got that native access to handles and messages. And it's mostly a lightweight wrapper around native widgets, but it does include a lot of owner-drawn GDI plus components as well. So it's not purely just a Win32 wrapper. And actually it does now enhance to have wrappers around some of the UWT, the new Universal Windows application components as well, with the new web view, for example. The app Microsoft's expanding with XAML islands. I know that's something we're going to see more of as well. It does continue to evolve with each new Windows, releasing latest features, controls, themes, and such. I remember back when Windows Vista came out, Delphi had Windows Vista look and feel support before Visual Studio did, which I thought was great. So it continues to be a key focus for Delphi and Embarcadero. Now, FireMonkey is the newer one. It takes advantage of GPU libraries to provide hardware acceleration. It's similar to VCL, but it's not designed to be compatible. And I think that's an important point, is it's conceptually, if you're familiar with VCL, you're going to know how to work with FireMonkey for the most part pretty quickly. But it's not designed to be backwards compatibility because that kind of limits what you can do with it. There are tools that make it easy to migrate from VCL to FireMonkey, but that decoupling in the backwards compatibility there is, well, it's not, backwards compatibility is not the right word because it's a whole new framework. It has these platform services too, if you're not familiar with them, that abstract away some of the details of the platform. So you don't have to think about the difference between different platforms. The classic example is tab controls. It automatically knows that on iOS, the tabs go at the bottom, whereas in Android, the tabs go on the top, and other things like that. But at the same time, you can still reach down and grab the platform-specific features if you want to, and as you need to. If you're debating on which to use, I made this little list here of kind of where I'm at with deciding which one to use. Generally, VCL is lighter weight with a more native feel. Now, FireMonkey does have some native controls where it actually uses the platform controls on certain platforms in like edit boxes and memos, for example. The web browser is another example. But the VCL generally feels more native, a little more lightweight. There's more third-party components on the VCL, and sometimes I like that traditional DB-aware controls that the VCL has. And also the better Windows integration for messages and handles. You can do messages and handles in FireMonkey, but it's more effort. So if I need some of those things, that's when I find myself using VCL. But more often than not anymore, I'm using FireMonkey, even if I don't have plans to go cross-platform. Just because I'm getting more and more familiar with FireMonkey, I prefer it, and I like to have that flexibility of going cross-platform in the future. Plus, there are some nice things. For example, the more flexible component model where you can embed one component in another component and make these composite components really easily. That's all built into FireMonkey. And I like the more layouts and alignments and container options that are available. I haven't done much with the 3D, but that's another reason you might choose FireMonkey. But I do like the animations and effects. Those are a nice touch to make your app a little more exciting.
Also want to just touch on some of the recent releases, and frequently I get lose track of what's new and what versions. So I'm going to keep it just to what's new since 11, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Is hopefully you've probably seen some of the recent releases, but I'm going to give this from my point of view what I think is interesting and exciting. I do want to point out down in the lower right, the new support for WSL2. This is a really big deal. This is the Windows subsystem for Linux. This makes it really easy to test and deploy your Linux applications, or if you don't want to set up an entire entire Linux VM to do Linux development, you can use that as well. So great option there to have full support for that. The new macOS ARM64 is a big deal as well, and continuing to see lots of other improvements elsewhere, including Android 30 API support. In 11.1, we saw a lot of general quality improvements, which is always great. It's one of those things that we always love to see new features, but the reality is the quality improvements are what really makes our life better from day to day. 1.2, really the big thing added here was the iOS simulator support. Now, if you don't know, this has to do with the change Apple made on their desktops. So all of their new Apple computers they ship for about a year now have the ARM processor, the M1 or now the new M2 processor in there, which is ARM based. So previously, when you ran in the simulator, it compiled an x86 version of your program. And so there were two different compilers when targeting iOS, iOS for x86 and iOS for ARM. Now, because the Macs are running ARM processors, just like in the mobile devices, and actually the new iPad Air uses the M1 processor, just like the Mac desktops. Then we have the C compiler that can target either the simulator or the actual device. Number of other quality and general improvements in there as well, including the VCL WebView 2, which is that XAML island I mentioned about. Well, it's the universal Windows application that is embedding the new WebView component in there. I don't know if you have a high DPI monitor yet. I got one fairly recently. I guess it was maybe a year or two ago now. I can't believe I waited that long. Having the IDE in high DPI is fantastic. It's so much better. It's one of those things, if you haven't used high DPI yet, you don't realize what you're missing. But the other thing that's great is that now it does support the high DPI designers. So it makes it easier to design in high DPI and know what it's going to look like. Now, I still have a low DPI, a regular monitor, and a high DPI monitor. And moving between the two, the IDE doesn't do great. But honestly, it does as good as, if not better than most other Windows applications, including even Windows Explorer. And I'm running Windows 11, but every now and then Windows Explorer just gets totally confused when I drag it from one window to the other. So yeah, it's not perfect. It's still being improved and getting better, but it is so much better than it used to be. It's great to see that. And other thing that's great is that we do have the multiple active styles now in the VCL Designer. So you can actually see your styles at design time, which is great, and have multiples that you're using at the same time. This is a new feature in 1.2, the tab state indication, which is a really big deal. I think it makes it easier to navigate. For example, you see a padlock when it's read-only, or different colors for different types of tabs and stuff. If you're like me and you get a lot of tabs going, it makes it much easier to navigate and move around and work in the IDE. This is part of two changes, actually. Well, so the first change is that it's no longer using Internet Explorer to render HTML. It's using a new component. I can't remember what it's called right now, Delphi HTML something. I should remember that. But it also includes the ability to do markdown. So this means that you don't get some of the weird old IE behaviors anymore. Plus, you now have markdown. So markdown is great. I'm a big fan of markdown. It's I heard it described as a what you see is what you want. And the idea is that you can use like put asterisks around a word to make it italics, or two asterisks to make it bold, and things like that. And so if you're reading it as plain text, it's still readable, much more readable than HTML. But when rendered properly, then you get a really nice, rich format. So big on GitHub if you're on GitHub or other code repositories. The help insight was improved. It's now using XSLT again and is fully customizable with links for navigation. So if you want to jump someplace, you can do that right from the help insight. This one is huge. Inactive code in the editor. I cannot tell you how many times I've been bitten by this where I'm like, why is this not working? What's going on here? Why can't I break here? Oh, it's a compiler directive. Now, when something is disabled by compiler directive, it's grayed out. Very, 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 very useful. Oh my goodness. So glad to see this one. And this is like one of those little things that makes a huge difference, in my opinion. They also have added code syntax highlighting in the disassembly view, which makes it much easier to work if you're in the disassembly view. This is one of those like dark magic areas of the IDE, if you will, that people that aren't familiar with the power of Delphi and think it's just another rapid application development tool. You show them this and they're like, whoa, wait, you can actually see the assembly? Yes, you can. Pretty amazing. Very useful when you're like not sure what's going on or trying to understand the nuances of something, or trying to optimize the performance of things where you can actually see the assembly that's being generated. And a few other IDE enhancements. I like the message view with the colors. I'm a very colorful person. I love seeing colors, as well as the icons and the new items dialog and such. As mentioned before, iOS simulator support. I do have a short demo I can show you of that here. So you can see that in action. It just works. There's not a lot to see except for the fact it works really.
So to deploy to the simulator, I just need to start PA server here on my M1 Mac. And let's get the IP address. There we go, 192.168.174. Got the mobile controls demo here. I'm going to go add platform, iOS simulator. Actually, let's start with the macOS ARM. And we'll check the connection. Yep, connected to the right one. Connection's good to go. And let's deploy it to the macOS ARM. Now, macOS ARM is a new platform added in 11. And there we go. Here, our mobile controls demo is running on the macOS ARM. So that compiled in Windows ARM in a virtual machine. So now let's go and add the simulator. And we'll run it. And I haven't imported the simulator SDK yet, so it's going to prompt me for that. And it just takes a few minutes to load all this in here. And if there's duplicates, I always tell it to overwrite the existing files. I sped that up for you, and now we will finish the deploy onto the iOS simulator. This is one of the great things about doing this in a virtual machine, is that when the simulator launches, it automatically pops me over here to the simulator. Now the simulator takes, again, just a few seconds to boot up, not that long. I will speed it up here for you though, so you don't have to wait. Right now it's using the iPhone SE 3rd generation running iOS 16. And there we go. The mobile controls demo is running on here. And we can rotate the screen to make it easier to see all the controls. And I'm going to say, don't show me this again. And let's switch to a different target. I'm going to go to the, let's just do the iPhone 14. The Pro Max is really big, so it makes everything really small on the screen. since I've changed my scale for video purposes here. Again, just flips this back over here automatically. Finished booting. And here is our application again, with that notch covering up our controls. So very useful if you want to make sure the notch isn't covering up something useful.
I'm a big fan of Android as a platform, so I'm always excited to see new Android news. Although I am making a more concerted effort to do more around iOS and Mac too, just because I've been kind of ignoring that platform. But it's exciting to see that we now have support for Android API level 32. So if you don't know, a while back, the Google Play Store started setting minimum requirements for different Android API levels. So that's something that we've been really good about, staying ahead of that in supporting the new API levels. So you can manually upgrade that on older versions of Delphi, but you could run into some problems. So it's a great thing about getting a new version is you get the better support for the latest API versions. Now, if you are moving an existing application, you may have something changed in your manifest, your app manifest file, the template version, that might be causing conflicts with that. So if you do run into issues, double check that. I wouldn't say delete it, but back it up. The IDE will automatically generate a new one, and then you can look and see what differences there are and see if there's changes you made that you need to reincorporate. Also, that we've moved away from the Oracle Java JDK to the freer versions. And that's just because they've changed the licensing around that. So now we're using the Eclipse Adoptium JDK and using version 11 of that, which is a newer version. It will use the existing version if you already have it installed, or you can use the Oracle one if you prefer that as well. Lots of other new Android improvements too. And as I already said, a big fan of FireDAC. More improvements around that, including the refined utility for migration now supports moving from DBGo to FireDAC. And we've added a compatibility unit for that as well. There's updates to FireDAC drivers, the support for Microsoft SQL Server on macOS M1, and MongoDB's new transaction feature. MongoDB is really cool. I had to take a deep dive into that a while back when we rolled out functionality for it. It was something I was vaguely familiar with prior. It's interesting. It's one of those things that until you dive into it, you don't really understand it, at least in my opinion. Most of the news and headlines you see about it gloss over the realities of using MongoDB. This is a big one. The FireDAC SQL editor has syntax highlighting, line numbers, and common shortcut keys. This is something I've been asking for a while, so I was really glad to see it because I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time writing SQL as well. And so it's great to have a better experience for that in there. Now, you can also edit your SQL files externally, but the reality is you're going to end up editing them sometimes in that SQL editor. So it's nice to have that in there, a more developer-friendly experience. And some more RAD server and HTTP REST improvements as well. Improved SSL certificate handling on Android and other important things like that. Now, I wanted to touch on this, but I'm going to dive into more in some of my later sessions. Actually, I'm not going to get into the Apperset's AWS SDK for Delphi. It's a really cool, great new feature that you can get. It's part of Enterprise and Architect. It's available via Get and it gives you access to the Amazon's AWS SDK. So lots of features out there on Amazon's AWS cloud infrastructure, and it makes it really easy for you to access those new features rolling out all the time. So definitely check out that if you have Enterprise or Architect. There are other third-party options out there for that, so it's not the only option, but it's nice to have it in the box, as it were, for Enterprise and Architect. And then I have a whole session on Python later on. This is a huge deal, I think. If you're not sold on it yet, join me for that session. I'll talk about why I think it's a big deal. But I think they're very complementary, Python and Delphi together. I'm a big fan of Python, becoming more a fan of Python, but I don't see that as detracting from my love for Delphi. So there's lots of great benefits for you as a Delphi developer there, as well as we're using it as a way to reach out to Python developers to introduce them to the wonderfulness that is Delphi. This is a map of the ecosystem. I'll go into more details in the later session, but thought I would show it here to see that there are quite a bit of different parts going on here and some really cool things happening. And a list of some of the different libraries that most of these are actually for Delphi developers. Actually, the Python environments, lightweight Python wrappers, and Python for Delphi data sciences. The first 4 items are Delphi related, and then the next 4 items are Python developer related. So we're trying to keep it fairly balanced, not be too one-sided, but the reality is once you get into this, you can take advantage of the full stack and do some really cool stuff. I'm pretty excited about it. So summarize the stuff I talked about here in 11.2. The simulator, 11.2 is all about simulator and quality and polish, and lots of little improvements. The simulator is great. Lots of other changes as well to make things better. And remind you, join me for my other sessions. Both these sessions are reasons why I'm really excited for the future of Delphi. The supercharge your GUI with Skia. Skia for Delphi is one of the newest libraries I'm most excited about. And then I'm going to go deeper dive into Python for Delphi. So check that one out. Go into some of the other libraries that are built on top of this and some of the cool things you can do with that. And with that, this is actually going to be the middle of the night for me, but I'm available for Q&A.